Every moviegoer thinks their favorite genre is eternal, until Hollywood proves them wrong. Once upon a time, these genres ruled the silver screen, packing theaters with spectacle, scandal, and dreams. Now, most are buried deeper than an unmarked studio lot. Which classic genres did Hollywood abandon? And why did audiences let them vanish without a fight? Ready for a nostalgia trip with a few jabs at the industry's short memory? Don't blink. You might just miss your old favorite. Backstage musicals. Remember when "the show must go on" was more than a cliché? Backstage musicals were the lifeblood of the 1930s and 40s. Hollywood, offering a glittering fantasy where every dressing room hit a song and dance number, and every crisis was solved by belting out a tune. These films didn't just deliver musical numbers. They put you in the trenches with the showbiz hopefuls, peeking behind the curtains as Broadway stars battled egos, romance, and ruthless producers. Busby Berkeley's kaleidoscopic choreography set the standard, transforming chorus girls into living, breathing set pieces, synchronized, sparkling, and impossibly precise. Backstage musicals were part fairy tale, part soap opera, but always a love letter to live entertainment. Movies like 42nd Street, Footlight Parade, and Gold Diggers of 1933 made the Depression-era audience forget their worries, if only for a couple of hours. The story formula was practically a law. A last-minute disaster threatens the big opening night. A plucky unknown is thrust into the spotlight. And by curtain call, everyone is a star. Toss in snappy wisecracks, extravagant sets, and enough feathers to make Liberace jealous, and you had a recipe Hollywood couldn't resist. But the curtain eventually fell. Audiences tired of the formula, and tastes shifted from fantasy to grit. The rise of television siphoned off the magic, and the big musical numbers lost their luster in a world inching toward realism. Today, the Backstage musical is more relic than revival, its heyday preserved in black and white reels, and the occasional film buff's playlist. When's the last time you saw a plucky understudy steal the show on the big screen? Exactly. Screwball comedies. If you think romantic comedies today are quirky, wait until you meet their wild grandparents. Screwball comedies were Hollywood's answer to the stress and strife of the Great Depression, firing off rapid dialogue, outrageous misunderstandings, and battles of the sexes that made war look polite. Imagine a world where Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn could turn a missing leopard or a misplaced dinosaur bone into 90 minutes of comic genius. These films thrived on chaos. Rich heiresses traded insults with wisecracking reporters, while meet-cutes usually ended with someone face first in a pie. Screwball comedies turned social order upside down. The rich became ridiculous, the wise got tricked, and romance was less about moonlit walks than verbal fencing matches. Classics like Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, and The Awful Truth were lightning in a bottle, driven by fast-talking scripts and actors who could sell an argument as foreplay. The Hays Code kept things technically innocent, so directors leaned on innuendo and physical comedy, creating a sexual tension so thick you could slice it with a quip. As America's mood changed and censorship relaxed, screwball comedies lost their grip. Audiences traded madcap mayhem for realism, and the genre's sharp, subversive wit faded into memory. Today's rom-coms owe them a debt, but rarely their edge. Watching a classic screwball now is like finding a bottle of vintage champagne. Fizzy, surprising, and guaranteed to give you a rush, if you're not afraid of a little old-school bite. Hollywood, take note. Sometimes what's old is desperately needed. Vaudeville/variety films. If you ever wondered why your grandparents talked about vaudeville acts like they were the moon landing, welcome to a genre Hollywood milked dry, and then some. Vaudeville and variety films were patchwork wonders, part musical, part stand-up, part circus sideshow, with a dash of anything goes thrown in. Studios rounded up every available dancer, crooner, acrobat, and joke slinger, shoving them into a loose plot, if you were lucky, just to keep the energy manic and the audience grinning. These movies didn't just showcase stars, they created them. Legends like Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, and the Marx Brothers all cut their teeth in this format, where timing was everything and subtlety went out the window. The sets were loud, the costumes even louder, and if the story didn't make sense, nobody seemed to care as long as someone was tap dancing or juggling flaming torches. Vaudeville films mirrored the spirit of American live entertainment, relentless, unpredictable, and fueled by a let's try anything bravado. But as radio and then television siphoned off vaudeville's magic, these films faded into kitschy novelty. By the 1950s, variety acts felt like ancient history, relics of a world that couldn't compete with the technological marvel of a flickering TV in every living room. These days, the genre survives only in dusty box sets and the occasional tribute number at the Oscars. The next time you catch a talent show montage, just remember, you're seeing the fossilized bones of a once mighty beast. Swashbucklers. There was a time when every kid in America dreamed of swinging from a chandelier, rapier in hand, with a dashing grin and a wink for the princess. That time was the age of the swashbuckler. These films brought to life the exploits of pirates, musketeers, and sword-slinging adventurers, complete with duels, treasure maps, and villains with facial hair you could lose a parrot in. Errol Flynn was the poster boy, launching 1,000 Halloween costumes with his turn in The Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood. Each film was a cocktail of romance, danger, and tongue-in-cheek bravado, wrapped in Technicolor and set to a roaring score. Swashbucklers were escapism in its purest form, letting depression and wartime audiences forget their worries as they watched heroes outwit tyrants and rescue damsels, usually while spouting the kind of clever banter that made every kid want to trade their homework for a cutlass. The costumes were flamboyant, the stakes high, and swordplay often more ballet than battle. Studios churned these out like candy, knowing there was no such thing as too many capes or too much adventure. But by the late 1950s, the genre had run aground. Modern audiences craved realism, and the swashbuckler's blend of fantasy and melodrama felt quaint, almost campy. Television delivered new heroes and new frontiers, leaving the old-fashioned daring-do behind. Today, the genre is mostly dusted off for nostalgia's sake or played as parody, its glory days preserved in film archives and the daydreams of anyone who's ever wanted to leap across a banquet table, sword in hand. Biblical epics. Hollywood never did subtlety better than with its biblical epics, by which I mean, it never did subtlety at all. These films were massive, gaudy spectacles, built to humble even the most jaded moviegoer. You want plagues, parting seas, thousands of extras wandering the desert in perfect costume? Hollywood delivered, with directors like Cecil B. DeMille, treating the Old Testament as a blank check for excess. Movies like The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur were more than stories. They were events. Studios saw these as the ultimate prestige project, a chance to flex every ounce of star power, special effects, and set-building muscle. The recipe, biblical morals, larger-than-life drama, and at least one set piece designed to make audiences gasp. At their peak, these epics commanded holiday release slots and dominated the box office, dragging moviegoers to theaters by the millions. They gave actors a shot at immortality and, let's be honest, some pretty hilarious fake beards. But as society shifted and the culture wars heated up, audiences grew weary of on-the-nose sermons and overwrought grandeur. The genre became a self-parody, and the rise of new blockbuster formulas pushed biblical tales back to Sunday school. Today, you're more likely to see a biblical epic as a late-night rerun than on the big screen, unless Hollywood decides to reboot the apocalypse one more time. Sword and sandal adventures. Long before Marvel made spandex cool, Hollywood had its own brand of muscle-bound heroes, the sword and sandal adventure. This genre flung audiences into the ancient world, where gladiators wrestled lions, gods meddled in mortal affairs, and every toga party ended in an epic battle. Italy cranked out these films by the dozen, but Hollywood put the big budget shine on classics like Spartacus and Quo Vadis. Sword and sandal adventures delivered everything audiences craved: sweeping vistas, roaring chariots, and the kind of dialogue that required a booming voice and at least one raised eyebrow. The formula was part history, part fantasy, all spectacle. Each hero had the abs of a Greek statue, the loyalty of a golden retriever, and a moral code that could survive 100 sandstorms. The stakes were always epic: empires in the balance, forbidden love, or the wrath of the gods themselves. But fashions change, and soon even the glistening pecs and endless battles couldn't keep the crowds coming. By the mid-1960s, audiences wanted something more modern, and the genre quietly slipped into cinematic history. Now, sword and sandal epics are a guilty pleasure, or the subject of loving parody. If you ever feel like yelling, "I am Spartacus," in a crowded room, you have this genre to thank. Film noir. If you've ever pictured a rain-soaked city street, a hard-boiled detective, and a femme fatale in a smoky jazz bar, congratulations, you've fallen under the spell of film noir. This was Hollywood's gritty, cynical answer to the bright lights and happy endings of most golden-era fare. Born out of post-war anxiety and existential dread, film noir gave us shadowy visuals, double-crossing dames, and dialogue so sharp it could cut glass. From The Maltese Falcon to Double Indemnity and Out of the Past, these films lived on the knife's edge. Nobody could trust anybody, and the line between hero and villain was thinner than a cigarette paper. Directors played with shadow and light, cramming every frame with atmosphere so thick you'd swear you could smell the whiskey and regret. Noir stars Humphrey Bogart, Barbara Stanwyck, and Robert Mitchum were tough, but always a little broken. The American dream never looked so bruised. But as the 1950s gave way to a more hopeful pop culture, noir's bitter flavor faded. Audiences swapped cynicism for optimism, and the genre slipped into cult status. Its legacy lives on in neo-noir homages and stylish thrillers. But the days of true, unfiltered noir are long gone. Next time you hear a wisecrack in the rain, just know you are hearing echoes from the golden darkness. Silent comedy shorts. Before Hollywood learned to talk, it knew how to fall down a lot. Silent comedy shorts were the foundation of the entire industry, serving up slapstick at breakneck speed for audiences who didn't need words to laugh. Legends like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd made the most out of nothing. A banana peel, a collapsing house, or a perfectly timed pie to the face. These shorts were cheap, fast, and everywhere. Movie houses stacked them before feature films, turning comedians into global superstars and inventing the visual grammar of comedy itself. Timing, physicality, and a complete disregard for personal safety were the order of the day. If you could make a pratfall look like ballet, you were golden. These films bridged all languages, backgrounds, and ages, humor that truly needed no translation. But once the talkies arrived, slapstick lost its voice. The emphasis shifted to witty dialogue and song, and silent comedy shorts faded from every theater except the late-night TV slot or specialty revival house. Still, their DNA is in every laugh-out-loud movie moment you love. If you've ever slipped, tripped, or face-planted for a laugh, you're living proof of silent comedy's immortality. Classic animation shorts as theatrical mainstays. Once upon a Saturday matinee, before cartoons became TV babysitters, animation shorts were a full-blown theater event. Studios like Warner Brothers, MGM, and Disney treated these as must-see openers. Think Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and Merry Melodies. Before the main feature rolled, the lights dimmed for 7 minutes of mayhem, wisecracks, and sight gags. The world got its first taste of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, not from the comfort of a living room couch, but from a plush theater seat, popcorn in hand, surrounded by a sea of cackling kids and plenty of smirking adults. These weren't just throwaway reels. They were showcases for cutting-edge animation, musical innovation, and subversive humor. The best animators poured their sweat, wit, and lunacy into making every short stand out. Cartoons lampooned pop culture, poked fun at politicians, and sometimes even slipped a little sly adult innuendo past the censors. For a generation, these shorts weren't just entertainment. They were the main reason to arrive early. But television was a thief in the night. The rise of Saturday morning cartoons and after-school TV blocks pulled animation from the big screen to the living room. By the late 1950s, studios saw little reason to fund high-quality theatrical shorts. The genre withered, its genius exiled to reruns and nostalgia programming. These days, if you catch a classic cartoon before a movie, consider yourself in the presence of a rare and vanishing Hollywood tradition. Big-budget Technicolor melodramas. Let's talk Technicolor melodramas, the cinematic equivalent of a velvet couch and a box of chocolates, heavy on style and emotional excess. In the 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood fell in love with lush, saturated color and stories so dramatic you could practically hear the violins. Directors like Douglas Sirk, Vincente Minnelli, and George Cukor served up tales of forbidden love, tortured ambition, and family secrets, all set in impossibly glamorous surroundings. Magnificent Obsession, Written on the Wind, and All That Heaven Allows weren't just movies. They were swooning, high-gloss fantasies for audiences hungry for escape. These films worked because they went big. Big emotions, big performances, and even bigger set pieces. The colors popped, the costumes sparkled, and the tears flowed in rivers. It was high drama, no apologies. Stars like Lana Turner and Rock Hudson became household names, and housewives across America lined up for every new release, hoping to lose themselves in heartbreak and redemption. But nothing lasts forever, not even melodrama. By the 1960s, tastes had shifted toward gritty realism, and the old formulas started to look cheesy, even camp. Technicolor was replaced by muted palettes, and melodrama faded into soap opera territory. Still, every time you see a prestige period film with glistening tears and lavish sets, you're witnessing the ghost of this once unstoppable genre. Studio system musicals, freed unit style. If you've ever wondered what it felt like to live inside a Technicolor fever dream, look no further than the classic studio musicals, especially the ones churned out by MGM's legendary Freed unit. Overseen by producer Arthur Freed, this was an assembly line for spectacle, churning out classics like Singin' in the Rain, An American in Paris, and Meet Me in St. Louis. Every film was a perfectly tuned machine, unforgettable tunes, show-stopping choreography, and a rotating cast of triple-threat stars. The sets were sprawling, the stories thin but heartfelt, and the dancing, well, nobody's ever topped Gene Kelly's puddle-stomping solo. Studio musicals were a safe bet in uncertain times, delivering hope and escapism with every frame. Even minor entries could become instant classics. Whole generations grew up believing a rainstorm meant it was time to dance in the street. Musicals weren't just a genre. They were Hollywood's favorite magic trick. But once again, changing tastes and the rising cost of lavish productions killed the goose that laid the golden eggs. Audiences drifted toward rock and roll, gritty drama, and stories that felt more grounded. The elaborate musical machine sputtered to a halt. The Freed unit dissolved, and the classic studio musical became a museum piece. Visited, loved, but never revived for real. If you hear a chorus line in your dreams, thank these vanished icons. Western B-movies. Back in the heyday of Hollywood, Westerns weren't just blockbuster tentpoles. They were an entire cinematic ecosystem. For every A-list epic starring John Wayne, there were a dozen B-Westerns cranked out like clockwork, filling screens at matinees and small-town theaters. These quick and dirty productions featured square-jawed cowboys, noble sheriffs, and villains with mustaches twirled to perfection. Plots were straightforward: good versus evil, showdowns at high noon, and maybe a stampede or two to round things out. B-westerns were cheap to make and easy to sell, the backbone of countless careers and a training ground for future stars. Studios like Republic, Monogram, and Poverty Row specialized in these brisk adventures, which offered reliable thrills and endless opportunities for horse chases, bar brawls, and last-minute rescues. Audiences loved the comforting ritual. Each film was a mini-myth, familiar, yet just different enough to keep kids glued to their seats. But television killed the B-Western faster than you can say, draw. As TV westerns flooded the airwaves, moviegoers stopped paying for what they could get for free at home. The market collapsed, and the genre faded into the sunset. Now, those old B-movies are collector's items, dusty, battered, and surprisingly influential, if you know where to look. Serials, Saturday matinee cliffhangers. Once upon a time, going to the movies meant more than just one story. The serial, a multi-chapter adventure told in weekly installments, was a ritual for millions of kids and adults alike. Whether it was Flash Gordon, The Phantom, or The Perils of Nyoka, these films were the original binge watch. Every episode ended on a nerve-jangling cliffhanger that left audiences gasping and coming back next Saturday, coins in hand. Serials were pure adrenaline, running on modest budgets but overflowing with imagination. Heroes dangled from cliffs, fought off masked villains, and discovered secret passages in every dusty tomb. Each week brought new perils, new gadgets, and new reasons to cheer or groan. Plots didn't need logic, just momentum, a ticking clock, and enough twists to keep everyone guessing. The genre's undoing. Progress. As features got longer and TV offered serialized drama at home, audiences lost patience for movie house cliffhangers. By the late 1950s, the Saturday matinee was history, and the serial became a trivia answer for film buffs and comic book fans. Still, you can draw a direct line from those creaky old chapters to every blockbuster franchise with a post-credits tease. Once upon a time, waiting a week was part of the thrill. Giant, monster, atomic creature features. Picture this. It's the 1950s. The world's obsessed with atomic power, space exploration, and lurking paranoia. Enter the atomic creature feature, Hollywood's wildest answer to the age of anxiety. From the beast, from 20,000 fathoms, to them. And Tarantula. Every studio wanted a giant bug, lizard, or mutated menace stomping across a model city. This genre didn't just exploit Cold War fears. It turned them into popcorn-fueled nightmares for kids and teens. The recipe was simple. A science experiment goes wrong. Something enormous emerges from the ocean or desert or sewer, and only square-jawed scientists or all-American teens can save the day. Monster suits were as beloved as they were cheesy, and audiences flocked to drive-ins for every new terror. Special effects teams became celebrities, building monsters from rubber, wires, and a lot of smoke. But as the 1960s dawned, the novelty wore thin. Audiences outgrew atomic anxiety, special effects improved, and the idea of a giant spider threatening humanity became more camp than chilling. Today, while Godzilla and friends occasionally stomp back onto screens with blockbuster budgets and high-tech effects, the original atomic creature feature, cheap, pulpy, and rooted in Cold War fears, is a vanished breed. Hollywood moved on, but if you ever wonder why your summer blockbuster has a city-smashing beast, look no further than these radioactive relics. AllStar ensemble comedies, road movies. Long before the modern buddy comedy or celebrity-packed holiday flick, Hollywood had its own flavor of star-studded, globe-trotting mischief. The AllStar ensemble comedy, typified by the beloved road movies of Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, and Dorothy Lamour. Studios delighted in mixing big personalities and outrageous situations, wild road trips, mistaken identities, exotic settings, and self-aware humor that bordered on breaking the fourth wall. The chemistry was the draw, not the destination. Films like Road to Morocco, Road to Utopia, and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World packed in cameos, wisecracks, and musical numbers, often winking at the audience with inside jokes and showbiz in-jokes. These movies were built on the star system. Pair two or more household names, give them a flimsy plot, and let them riff. Audiences ate it up, laughing at the antics and marveling at the parade of familiar faces. But changing comedic tastes and the collapse of the old studio system spelled doom for this genre. By the late 60s, variety shows and sketch TV siphoned off the star-driven fun, and the road formula stalled out. Today, the genre's spirit survives in ensemble cast comedies and celebrity crossovers, but that old-school cocktail of slapstick, banter, and musical interludes. Pure golden age, and gone for good. Exotic South Seas adventures. Before jet-setting was mainstream, Hollywood delivered a steady stream of escapist fantasies set in the South Seas, lush islands, pearl divers, forbidden romance, and just enough danger to spice things up. These films offered white sand escapism, starring the likes of Dorothy Lamour, John Hall, and Maria Montez, who practically patented the sarong-clad siren look. Plots were simple. An outsider washes ashore, falls in love, faces off with pirates or volcanoes, and soaks up the tropical sun. These movies gave war-weary audiences an intoxicating vision of paradise, mixing romance, adventure, and spectacle. It was all about atmosphere, lush backdrops, dreamy music, and costumes as breezy as the palm trees. Studios shot these films on backlots with potted plants and papier-mâché mountains, but it hardly mattered. For viewers in snowbound cities, these films were pure wish fulfillment. Eventually, the world changed. Audiences became more sensitive to cultural stereotypes, and global travel lost its air of exotic mystery. By the 60s, the South Seas adventure faded into kitsch, remembered mostly for camp value and glamorous posters. Still, every beachside romance and stranger in paradise trope owes a debt to these now lost fantasies. Operetta films. Here's a genre that only the golden age could love: the operetta film. These were lavish, music-heavy productions that adapted popular European operettas, or invented their own, for the screen. Think The Merry Widow, Naughty Marietta, and Jeanette MacDonald, and Nelson Eddy serenading each other across a pastel dreamscape. Operettas were lighter than opera, but grander than musicals, full of lush orchestrations, elaborate costumes, and romance dialed up to 11. These films were comfort food for Depression-era audiences, offering escapism with every lilting duet and sweeping ballroom scene. Their roots were unmistakably Old World, often dripping with waltzes, frock coats, and swooning declarations of love. Audiences adored the spectacle and the singing, and studios didn't mind showing off the latest sound technology or color processes. But as pop music and naturalistic acting took over, the operetta's formal, sung-through approach felt hopelessly old-fashioned. By the late 40s, the genre had been pushed aside by the American musical and rarely surfaced again outside of specialty revivals. Today, the operetta film is a museum piece, gorgeous, grand, and as distant as a world seen through frosted glass. Women's pictures. Soap melodramas for adult women. Forget superheroes. Once upon a time, Hollywood made movies for women that didn't involve a single cape or flying car. The women's picture was a staple of the golden era. Dramatic, emotional stories focused on the struggles, passions, and triumphs of female protagonists. Studios poured money into tearjerkers like Mildred Pierce, now Voyager, and Stella Dallas, casting the biggest names, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Barbara Stanwyck, in roles that guaranteed heartache, hard choices, and at least one unforgettable sacrifice. These films tackled issues rarely seen elsewhere: divorce, single motherhood, class struggle, and forbidden romance. They let actresses flex their dramatic chops and drew devoted female audiences who wanted more than slapsticks or gunfights. Critics sometimes sneered at the genre, but the box office never lied. These stories mattered, and they sold tickets. But by the 1960s, changing social attitudes and the breakdown of the studio system pushed women's pictures out of fashion. Television soap operas took over the melodrama crown, and film focused on youth, counterculture, and new kinds of heroes. Still, the DNA of the women's picture lingers in every prestige drama and tearjerker with a powerhouse female lead. Historical costume dramas as studio tentpoles. Once upon a time, if you wanted to win Oscars or impress the neighbors, you made a historical costume drama, preferably with more hoop skirts, powdered wigs, and royal intrigue than a year's supply of gossip magazines. From Marie Antoinette to That Hamilton Woman to Julius Caesar, these films weren't just entertainment. They were Hollywood's most reliable path to prestige, packing theaters with visions of distant empires, forbidden love, and tragic destinies. Studios invested a fortune in lavish sets, armies of extras, and costumes that weighed more than the average actor. The aim? Sweep audiences away into the past, with the promise of romance, grandeur, and just a little bit of educational value, or at least an excuse for Clark Gable to wear tights. A-list stars lined up to play queens, rebels, poets, and generals. These movies were as much about pageantry as plot. There were duels and court scandals, glittering balls and grand speeches, and usually at least one scene where a heroine faints on a staircase. But as tastes changed and production costs soared, the appetite for three-hour epics set in ancient palaces vanished. Audiences wanted modern stories, snappier dialogue, and fewer corsets. The genre limped along with the occasional hit, but its reign as the king of studio blockbusters ended with the golden era. Now, costume dramas are rare. Prestige one-offs, beloved by awards voters, sure, but no longer the backbone of the movie industry. All that's left are the dazzling gowns in museum exhibits, the faded posters, and a million stories waiting to be rediscovered. So here's the twist. Hollywood may have left these genres behind, but their fingerprints are everywhere, on modern blockbusters, prestige dramas, even late-night reruns. Which lost genre would you resurrect if you had the keys to the studio vault? Drop your pick in the comments. Hit subscribe for more classic Hollywood deep dives, and share this with anyone who still dreams of Technicolor. After all, the movies never really forget. They just wait for the right audience to bring them back.